Okay, morning everybody.
Good morning.
We ended off last time with a machloket l'shem shamayim between David Marks and myself about women soldiers. And just so that we should redress the balance, we will now talk about a subject about which David and I will not have any disagreement with whatsoever. Since we were talking in our Gemarah about how a war is declared and what is necessary for a war to be declared, we are over here in the Gemarah. I'll share the screen with you straight away. We're on page 16a towards the bottom, and it's there on the screen for you, if you can see it, with a little S sign. And ein motzi'in v'chule. We only take out or go out to war with the permission of the 71-man Beit Din. That's what we're trying to prove at the moment. The 71-man Sanhedrin is required to approve going out to war. And we spoke last week in some detail about what type of war we're talking about. And if you recall, there were two types of war, which the Chachamim called a milchemet reshut, a permissible war, what was the word? A discretionary war. That was the word they used. A discretionary war, meaning that it's not commanded by Hashem to do so, but it is permitted to do so. And that kind of war was the war which was to expand the boundaries of Eretz Israel and not in a defensive manner. The second type of war that we spoke about last week was milchemet mitzvah, a mitzvah war, a war which we are commanded, using the word mitzvah in its literal sense, as it were, that we are commanded to do so. And as Avril Link said last week, the archetypal mitzvah war was the conquest of the land by Joshua. That was commanded to us by Hashem, that we should go into the land and conquer the land. Having done so, any war which is to defend the land, defend the boundaries of Eretz Israel, is a milchemet mitzvah. We also spoke about the concept of the deliberate naming of the armed forces. The British armed forces are known as the British Armed Forces. They are not known as the Defense Forces. The American Army is known, as far as I'm aware, I don't know, Larry and Sharon will be able to correct me if I'm wrong, as the American military. I don't think the word defense is in there. But Israel, from the offset, called its army the Israel Defense Forces, deliberately, because we are not an aggressive people. We are a defensive people. We will fight if we have to fight, but we are only interested in defending our land as a milchemet mitzvah. And we also briefly spoke about Rabbi Yehuda's opinion, who gave them different names, but I'm not going to go into that now, because the Chachamim's nomenclature of milchemet reshut, a discretionary war, versus a mitzvah war, is what we'll stick with. Yes, Larry or Sharon or both.
Hi, this is Sharon on behalf of both of our thinking. Our military department is called the Department of Defense.
Yes, but what's your military called?
It's just
the US Army,
US
Navy, Air Force,
and Coast Guard and Marines,
right,
and Navy. So I don't think it has either. It simply describes, what they do in the country. But I'd like you also to address what Julia brought up last week, which is the question of alliances. not only because it's so current today, but because it was current at the time of Isaiah.
Yeah. Okay. Well, we're going to talk about the alliances, I think, in a moment, because that comes under the category of, well, it can come under the category of a milchemet mitzvah or a milchemet reshut, and we'll just come up. We'll talk about that briefly in a minute. So thanks for that. So we are talking here about a milchemet reshut, a discretionary war. A mitzvah war, a commanded war, does not need the approval of the 71-man Sanhedrin. Who decides? Well, that's another question, but it does not need the approval of the 71-man Sanhedrin. Presumably, the thinking is that if it's commanded by God, we don't need, thank you very much, human beings to say whether we can or we can't do it. We don't convene the 71-man Sanhedrin to decide whether we should keep Shabbat. If it's a mitzvah, it's a mitzvah.
How did God convey the instructions to? Well, with the prophet, maybe he told the.
Yeah, I think so. I think that's right. I think at the time of Tanakh we were talking about here, we had prophets, and we're learning at the moment. We're learning Shmuel, aren't we? So we have Shmuel Hanavi. We have Natan, who's going to take over from Shmuel during the reign of David. And these men were party, as it were, to the some kind of discord with HaKadosh Baruch Hu, some kind of dialogue, some kind of message from HaKadosh Baruch Hu through the Navi. So I think that's right. Sometimes it's obvious, Johnny, if you get attacked from outside, then it's obvious that this is a defensive war and you have a mitzvah to defend yourself. What we're talking about here, the Milchemet Reshut, is I suppose, a good example in modern times might be the First Lebanon War, Mivtza Shalom Begalil, Operation Peace in Galilee, I think it was called, in 1981, 82, something like that. That was a war whereby the Israeli government, led by Menachem Begin, was responding to many attacks into the Galil from Lebanon by Hezbollah, I suppose, or its predecessor. And they decided they were going to fed up with that and they were going to clear it. And the original Mivtza, the original operation, was to go 50 kilometers into Lebanon and to clear an area of 50 kilometers so that there would be no people in that 50 kilometer area flinging rockets into the Galil. And that was, well, debatable whether it was beyond the biblical borders of Israel. It was certainly beyond the international borders of Israel as it stood at the time. Debatable whether it was in the biblical promise, because the promise to Abraham did extend up into what is now Lebanon. But that would, I think, be considered to be a Milchemet Reshut. You could argue that it was a defensive war because it was defending and reacting to an attack by rockets, and I wouldn't argue with that either. But you could certainly make out a case that that was a Milchemet Reshut. It was not a war that was popular here. It was not a war that was universally agreed should have started, never mind the way it finished in chaos and carnage. But that would have been, I think, a Milchemet Reshut back in the day, and they would have needed the 71-man Sanhedrin. We spoke last time about the psukim that told us who was not to go to war: the man who's planted a vineyard, the man who's built a house, the man who's engaged to a woman, and the man who's scared. And we said that that refers only to a Milchemet Reshut, a Milchemet Mitzvah. I showed you the Mishnah in Sota, which showed you that a man, even in the middle of his chuppah, or a kala mechupata, has to go out and join the war effort. either as a combat soldier or, if you prefer, in the supply lines. But either way, they have to go out and serve, which of course leads us to this. Let's get it out of the way straight away. How do I get rid of my share screen? Oh, that's a bit odd. Stop share. There we go. Right. So let me show you something else. We mentioned it very briefly last week. Here it is on the screen for you. Parashat Matot. Famously, the Bnei Yisrael at this point in their history are ready to cross the Jordan to go into Eretz Canaan to occupy the land. Moshe Rabbeinu is about to take his leave. It's at the end of Bamidbar. Remember, the whole of Sefer Dvarim is Moshe Rabbeinu's valedictory speech. This is just before the end of that. Two tribes, Reuven and Gad, come to Moshe Rabbeinu and say, we would like to stay on this side of the Jordan. We don't want to cross over to the Jordan, over the Jordan into Canaan. We like it here. We've got lots of animals, and this is good pasture land for our livestock, and we would like to stay here. And Moshe Rabbeinu is rather upset by that suggestion. And there on the screen for you is a famous pasuk. Vayomer Moshe livnei Gad v'livnei Reuven. Moshe said to these two tribes, Ha'achechem yavou lamilchama va'atem teshvu po. Your brothers shall come to war, and you will sit here. It's a rhetorical question. Answer, absolutely not. You will not stay here in safety whilst your brothers go out to war. And of course, this pasuk is quoted over and over again when the very thorny issue of the Haredi draft, or the lack of Haredi draft, is debated. One of the subjects which divides this country perhaps more than any other issue is the issue of the Haredi young men who are ostensibly learning in yeshiva and don't go to the army. And those who think that they should quote this pasuk ad nauseam. Moshe says to these people, your brothers will go to war and you'll sit here and do nothing? No. And what do they answer? They answer, where's the answer? Here we go. The answer is verse 16. You've got it wrong, Moshe. That's not what we were suggesting. We will build sheepfolds for our livestock here and cities for our children. We will then arm ourselves and go before the children of Israel. We will be the vanguard. We will go out there and be the pioneers. We'll be first in line. We're not asking for a free pass. We're asking to cut that this should be our ancestral land. This should become our ancestral land. But we are fully willing to take more than our fair part in the fighting for the land. Only when the full land has been possessed will we return home. It's verse 18. We shall not return to our homes until each of the children of Israel has taken possession of his inheritance. And in fact, how many years did it take before they actually did go back to their land? They fought, they stayed over the west side of the Jordan for a period of 7 years before they went back to their own land. So they were as good as their word. But initially, Moshe said, you can't do that. You cannot allow your brothers to go to war and you will not join in. And of course, this is quoted for, very much by those who strongly feel that the Haredi men should not have a free pass out of the army. And it might just be worthwhile just spending 5 minutes or less even looking at that situation of the Haredi draft or the exclusion or the exemption from the draft for the Haredi men, just to put it in its historical perspective. It was a deal done by Ben Gurion right at the beginning of the state, part of what's known as the status quo. The thing is, the number of students that were exempt from military service at the beginning of the statehood in 1948 was very, very few. I don't know the number, but it was very few. We're talking, you know, a couple of thousand tops, probably less. Now, if you look at the figures, there's a Wikipedia page on this, which has got some figures on it, which is quite interesting. These are a bit old now, a bit out of date, these figures, and they're probably more now. Out of all the people who received exemptions from the army, 44%, 44.7% were Haredi, for a Haredi population of around 11%. So exemptions are 400% more in the Haredi community than in the non-Haredi community. And we end up having literally tens of thousands of people who are supposedly in yeshiva learning and not working, and therefore exempt from the army. Now,
I understood that it was it was going to be 300. The exemption was for 300 students originally.
I don't know the numbers. It certainly was a small number. Let's have a look. I read it somewhere. Can't remember where I read it now. I was reading it up. It's a small number. I for some reason or other, I've got 450 or something in my head. But whatever the number was, Michael, it was a small number. And whatever the number is today, it's a very, very large number. Now, there are two aspects to this. There's the aspect of universality and everybody taking responsibility, mutual responsibility. The Haredim are particularly fond of an expression that says, Kol Yisrael arevim zeh b'zeh. Every Jew is responsible for another one. And in some regards, some people would say that they're not fulfilling that because they're not going in the army. They would say, we are doing our national service by learning Torah. And if there's no Torah being learned, then we won't have God's help. And therefore, we are in the firing line, as it were, just as much as they are. We are soldiers of Hashem, Tzivois Hashem, as the Chabadniks call them. They are the army of Hashem, learning for that purpose. And that therein lies the argument. The truth is, as I understand it, that actually today, in the 21st century, the army does not want a few 100,000 untrained, uneducated, Haredi, disobedient soldiers. They don't want them any more than they want to serve. So I don't think it's an issue of making everybody go and be combat soldiers. But there's certainly a position, in my humble opinion, to say that there should be national service. They will say they're doing national service by learning in yeshiva. And I don't have a problem with that if those yeshivas were under army control and they were regulated appropriately, but they're not. So it remains a very, very thorny issue in this country. The fact that Haredi young men are seen not to be joining in the very, very difficult thing, which is to go to the army. It's difficult for the people who go to the army. It's even more difficult for the parents of those that go to the army. And I can speak there as in personal experience. I never went to the army, but my two sons who live here went to the army, and it's horrible when you don't know where they are and whether they're safe, and especially when you know they're out there in what they call the shetach, and it's a very, very hard thing for a parent. And God forbid a million times if you get that knock on the door, that's something that doesn't bear thinking about. So you can see, obviously, we all understand why it is such an emotional experience and such an emotional topic. This we could go on forever on it, and I don't think that we will ever fix this problem to anybody's satisfaction, because the positions are completely and utterly entrenched.
Just given another 59 billion shekels in the budget for the Haredim.
Now we have a government which is, is that way inclined. It's a
59
problem.
billion shekels.
A couple of governments ago, we had a government which did not have any Haredi ministers, and they made a whole bunch of new laws, and then they were just retracted, or whatever the word is, as soon as the next government came in. It's a problem that this country has and will have, as far as I can see, in the foreseeable future. Nobody is satisfied with it, and it causes great divide. It's probably the most divisive issue in the country. I've seen and heard both secular and traditional Jews speak with absolute venom about the Haredim because they don't pull their weight in the army. Equally so, I've heard Haredim describe the Israeli army as Nazis, and etc. And you have a very, very divided country on this issue. I suspect that most of us here will have a view about it. Probably we all pretty much agree with our view. Will probably be of one, but it's a very difficult problem. I just bring it up just because it's the elephant in the room when we're talking about going out to war. So let's go back now to the Gemarah, because we are in fact meant to be learning Gemarah in this Shia. We haven't done much of that recently because we got sidetracked into war, but I think it's about time we got back into the Gemarah. So let's have a look and see what the Gemarah is saying. Remember, what the Gemarah is trying to do here is trying to find a scriptural support for the Mishnah back on page 2a, or page 9 if you're in the Steinsaltz, which said 71-man Sanhedrin needs to declare this war. Mina hane mili, here we are. From where do they get this? From where do we see this? What's the scriptural source for this? So first up is Rabbi Abahu. Rabbi Abahu has a go, and he says, I know where it's from. The Amar Kra, the verse says, Pasuk says, V'lifnei Elazar HaKohen Ya'amod. And this is talking about the appointment of Joshua as the leader of Israel. Let's get it up. Numbers 27:21. Rav Steinsaltz tells us where it is, which is handy. Let's get it straight up. Numbers 27:21. There we go. Numbers. Chapter 27, verse 21. So here we go. Moshe is told that he's not going to cross the Jordan. He's not going to lead the people in because
it's not on the screen, Johnny. It's not on the screen.
Not on the screen. Sorry. There we go. Thank you.
Yes. Yes.
Thank you. Moshe is told he's not going to cross the Jordan as the leader, and as we know, Va'et Chanan el Hashem, he pleads for mercy, but as the Torah tells us, he was also concerned about the people themselves, and he says, verse 16, let the Lord, the God of spirits of all flesh, appoint a man over the congregation who will go forth before them and come before them, who will lead them out and bring them in, so that the congregation of the Lord will not be like a sheep without a shepherd. So basically, Moshe is saying to Hashem, it's a bit of a chutzpah really when you think about it. Moshe says to Hashem, I think you ought to think about a replacement for me. You can't leave these people without a leader. And who should you choose? You have to choose somebody. Let's look in the Hebrew. Asher yetzei lifnehem, who will go out before them. Asher yavo lifnehem, and who will come in before them, who will lead them in. Asher yotzeim v'asher yivi'im, who will lead them out and lead them in again. So what we're talking about here? Yeah, a leader, Julia. What kind of a leader?
Are we not talking about going over to Canaan?
Yeah, we are. And what's he going to do when he gets there?
So a warrior leader.
Warrior leader. He's going to fight, isn't he? This is that expression. Remember, I'll show you the Gemarah back again in a minute. But what did the Gemarah ask the question? The Mishnah said, Ein yotzein. That's all it said. You don't go out. What does that mean, go out? It means go out to war. That expression means yotzin, means you go out to war. So here, asher yetzei lifneihem, who will go out before them, means they will go out to them before them in war. V'asher yotziem, who will lead them out. He will be a warrior leader. So Moshe is saying to Hashem here, you need to appoint a leader who will take the people out to war and be their military leader. Okay, so Hashem says, all right, you're right, Moshe. And he says, verse 18, Vayom Hashem el Moshe, Kach lecha et Yoshua ben Nun. Take Joshua the son of Nun, Ish asher ruach bo. He's a man who has spirit. Remember, what did Moshe ask? He said, he called Hashem the God of all spirits. So he says, yeah, you're right. We need somebody with spirit. This is a man with spirit. Yoshua, v'samachta et yadcha alav, and you shall lay your hands on him, lean your hands on him. We've had that, haven't we, a few months ago when we were speaking about smicha. Remember in the Gemarah, a few months or maybe even a year ago, we were speaking about how many judges it takes to make smicha. That, and we quoted this pasuk a lot. Joshua had his hands, Moshe's hands put upon him. And then what? Not just that Moshe has to lay his hands on him. V'ha'amadta oto lifnei Elazar hakohen, and you shall present him, stand him from Omeid. You shall stand him, cause him to stand before Elazar hakohen, before Elazar the Kohen. Where's Aaron, by the way? Why Elazar hakohen? Why not Aaron? Why not
Aaron already died?
Well, Aaron has just died, yes. Aaron has died very recently at this point. Elazar is now the Kohen Gadol. So standing before the Kohen Gadol, and who else? V'lifnei kol ha'edah, and in front of all the Eidah. All the Eidah. What does Eidah mean?
Congregation.
Congregation. But we'll see that it means something else as well. You're right, it means congregation.
But does it
And
mean
that's how
all the
we would understand
Witness,
that
witness.
at first glance. What did you say, Julia?
Does it mean the people, or is the congregation something different?
Ah, well spotted. Julia has her Gemarah cop on today. That is exactly what the Gemarah is going to come on and ask that question. Is the Eidah really the Eidah? V'tzivita oto le'ineihem, and you shall command him, i.e. you, Moshe, will command Joshua to take over le'ineihem, before their eyes, or as it says here, in their presence. So this is the verse that the Gemarah is quoting. It's the verse where Joshua is commanded to become the leader, but not just any old leader, the military leader. And since we are talking in our Gemarah about wars, this is an appropriate pasuk for them to quote. So let's go back to the Gemarah now.
Johnny?
Yes.
Yeah, Art Scroll makes a very interesting comment here. Note 29, if you want to look at it. The comment of Rabbeinu Yonah.
Rabbeinu Yonah notes that wars waged against the 7 nations that inhabited Eretz Israel prior to the Jewish conquest were not considered discretionary wars. Correct? That's what we said earlier, wasn't it? That these wars were milchemet mitzvah. Joshua's war to conquer Eretz Israel was thus obligatory, not discretionary. How then, asks Rabbeinu, I remember this now, yeah. How then, asks Rabbeinu Yonah, can the verse dealing with Joshua's war teach anything about discretionary wars? A very good question. And then I remember this when I was preparing the shir last week. it then says, see Rabbeinu Yonah, who considers several solutions to this problem. Well, since I didn't have a Rabbeinu Yonah, I couldn't see Rabbeinu Yonah, and so I don't know what his several solutions are, but I do understand the question. We've made a big fuss, haven't we, about the difference between a Milchemet Reshut and a Milchemet Mitzvah. We also said the archetypal Milchemet Mitzvah is the war that Joshua waged against the 7 nations. We also said that this Ein Mutzi in business only applies to a discretionary war. So this pasuk really is irrelevant to our Gemara. David, have you got a Rabbeinu Yonah? Have you looked it up? Do you know what he says?
I probably have got Rabbeinu Yonah in the back of a Gemarah here. I haven't looked it up, but maybe without looking it up, we know reading on that Rabbi Abahu's source is going to be discredited, and maybe this is one of the reasons why we don't follow Rabbi Abahu. Okay,
all right. Yes, that's logical. We do know that he's going to be discredited, which is why I said at the beginning, first up to have a go is Rabbi Abahu, because I've read on and he is going to get booted out. So anyway, if you would like to look up Rabbeinu Yonah for us at some point during the next week, David, it would be very nice to hear what he's got to say about this difficult question that he raises. Okay, David is not committing himself to do so, but no, we've not even got a smile. All right. Oh, now we've got a smile. Okay. Right. So it's a good question. We don't know why, but Rabbi Abahu brings this pasuk. And so let's have a look. Rav Steinsaltz helps us out here. And he says, what is he getting at here? What's he getting at? Lifnei Elazar HaKohen Ya'amod. He should stand. Joshua was to stand in front of the Kohen Gadol. What does the Kohen Gadol wear on his chest?
Choshen.
The Choshen. And what is inside the Choshen, Johnny?
It's got all the stones that's like a computer.
Yeah, the computer stones. That's a good way of putting it. The Urim v'Tumim.
Urim v'Tumim, yeah.
And these were the things, if you remember, that when you had a question, you went and asked it, you know, who's going to win the league? And it will flash up on the screen here, the letters, and you have to put them together to get the answer. So he shall stand before Elazar the priest, and he shall ask counsel. Look at Steinsaltz helps us out here. He shall ask counsel of the Urim before the Lord. By his word they shall go out, and by his word they shall come in, and he and all the children of Israel with him, and all of the congregation. And that is a direct quote of the pasuk that we just saw. So the whole idea here of quoting this pasuk, despite the fact that we're talking here about a milchemet mitzvah, is that this tells us that when you go out to war, you have to ask Hashem's permission, if you like, or whether it is a mitzvah to do so. And the way you do that is through the Urim v'Tumim, the Choshen, the magic computer. Now, let's have a look, go back to the pasuk, because we need to have a look, because the Gemara now is going to look at other bits in the pasuk. Who? Right, then we need to see that there, who, in quotation marks. Let's have a look at the end of the verse. Let's go back to the pasuk. Sorry to be slipping back and forth, but no choice really but to do that. There it is. Va'al piv yavo, al piv yetzu, on his mouth, by his word shall they go out to war. Va'al piv yavo, and on his mouth shall they come in. Who? Him. Who's who? Who's him? Joshua. V'chol b'nei Yisrael ito, and all the b'nei Yisrael with him. V'chol ha'edah, and all the congregation. What's your problem with that pasuk? Julia, I'm asking you.
Well, I haven't noticed it all, but I don't really understand the last few lines, because if it says he and all Israel. Surely the entire congregation is included in all Israel.
Exactly. Julia, you will make a great Gemarah Rebbe. You've missed your vocation in life. You should go. You should go and be a Maggid Shir. You're right. But who, he, and all the Bnei Israel, and all the congregation. Well, the Gemarah doesn't like that because it does not like superfluity. Is that a word? Superfluity, whatever the word is. Superfluousness, or whatever the word is.
Not very far.
No, not superfluousness, superfluity. Is that all right, Julia? Okay. Anyway, it doesn't like superfluous words. And the Chol Ha'idah is superfluous because all the congregation is included in the Chol B'nai Yisrael. And therefore, it must be that there is a different meaning for these things. And that is what the Gemarah is now going to take us through. So try and remember this pasuk in your mind. He and all B'nai Yisrael with him and all the entire congregation.
I don't think the word entire needs to be in because if the word entire isn't.
Well, the word entire is v'chol. See that? V'chol.
Oh, I see. Oh, yes. And then, yes. Yeah.
Okay, so let me now unshare.
Yes.
And reshare the Gemarah. There we go. So, Rabbi Abahu says the following. When it says who, meaning he, i.e. in our case, Joshua, it means Zeh Melech, means the king. Why does it mean the king? How does he know that? Because Joshua was in place of Moshe. And as we know, effectively, Moshe was the king. Even though he wasn't called the king, he was effectively the king. Joshua himself was the undisputed ruler of Bnei Yisrael, perhaps the last undisputed ruler of Bnei Yisrael until the time of maybe Shaul, certainly David. Not sure about Shaul, really. I mean, we've been learning Shaul in great detail, haven't we? Would you say at any point that he was the king of all Israel? Possibly for a short period of time. But certainly after Joshua, we went through the judges who we know were not recognized by all the tribes at once. And then, of course, we came to King Saul. So Joshua was the last undisputed leader of the people until at least Shaul and probably David. But he was the Melech. So who refers to the Melech? Kol B'nai Yisrael ito. Now this is really interesting. This is Rabbi Abahu being very imaginative in my view. When it says, and the whole of B'nai Yisrael with him, what would you think that means? You would think that it means, and the whole of B'nai Yisrael with him, because that's what it says. Not Rabbi Abahu. He says, that means Zeh Meshuach Milchama. That is referring to our Kohen, who is the military Kohen. Remember, we had him last week. His entire job in life was to say that shtickle, who's frightened and who's built a house and who's married a woman and who's planted a vineyard bit. And don't be frightened. And if you are frightened, you can go home. He is the Kohen HaMashuach LeMilchama. He is the Kohen who is anointed with the temple oil to do that job, to be the military Kohen announcer. And Rabbi Abahu understands the words V'chol B'nai Yisrael ito, meaning the guy, the priest, the Kohen who is got that job. Now, how does he get that? Where does he learn that from? Well, he says that because it says because according to I'm just going to quote who it was that said so. The Cohen chosen for task was known as the anointed for battle, blah, blah. Yeah, the verse according to Rashi, that's right. Rashi in Gemarah Yoma, this is in footnote 32 for those who've got an art scroll. Rashi in Yoma says, it's a bit shvach if you ask me, but this is what he says, that Rabbi Abahu says that this is the Cohen who is anointed for battle because the entire nation followed him into battle. Bit schwach, don't you think? You know, but anyway.
When he left after he gave all the people who didn't have to go.
Yeah, you're right. You're right, Johnny. It wasn't the old people that followed him into battle. Half of them have gone home because he's excused them. But anyway, that's what Rashi says.
I would have thought it's more likely to be the other way around. The whole congregation is more likely to be the Sanhedrin, whereas all of Israel is all of Israel, full stop. Right.
Well, yes. And you preempted there a little bit, Michael. Let's carry on and we'll see that. So according to Rabbi Abahu, I'll tell you why he can't say it's the whole of Israel, because Rabbi Abahu is using this pasuk to say who gets a say in whether we go to war. Well, you can't have the entire Bnei Yisrael coming along and making that decision. You know, you can't have a referendum every time you want to go to war because you haven't got time. So it can't mean the whole Bnei Yisrael, according to Rabbi Abahu. I'm not saying that I agree with Rabbi Abahu. I don't. I think his explanation is really very thin, personally, but that's his explanation. And he says, whole Bnei Yisrael means the Mashuach HaMilchama, because everybody who's left anyway, after they've all gone home, follows him into battle. So according to Rabbi Abahu, so far, the person making the decision on going out to war is who? I don't mean who in English, who in Hebrew, meaning the king. Kol b'nei Yisrael ito, that's the special Kohen. V'chol ha'edah. And Rabbi Abahu says, Zeh Sanhedrin. That is the Sanhedrin. And that is exactly what Julia said, exactly what Michael said. The Edah cannot refer to the congregation because the congregation has already been referred to in Kol B'nai Yisrael. It also can't mean the whole of B'nai Yisrael for the reason that I just said, that would be an unwieldy decision-making process. Remember, we're talking about a decision to go out to war here. These are decisions that have to be made quickly and efficiently, and therefore it needs to be done by people who are responsible, people who are representing the people, and people who can get together quickly and efficiently and do so. The inner cabinet, I guess you'd call it the war cabinet in modern terminology, and it consisted of the king, the Kohen HaMashuach Lemilchama, and V'chol ha'edah refers to the Sanhedrin. Now, we know that this refers to the Sanhedrin because back on page 13b, which was quite a long time ago, but back on page 13b, we proved that the word Edah there referred to the Sanhedrin, and we're now, if you like, bringing forward that proof. We've got that in our pocket, if you like, that Edah, we don't need to go through all that again. Edah can refer to the Sanhedrin, and that's where it does refer to, according to Rabbi Abahu. Now, as we said before, that Rabbi Abahu's opinion is challenged and ultimately booted. Here comes the challenge. Says the Gemara.
Is aid the root of the word Edah, witness?
Same word, aid, witness, yeah. A congregation gives witness, yes. Say testimony.
Yeah.
So yes, it's the same root. So the Gemara challenges now. Says the Gemara, V'dilma, that's a very common Gemara word. It means perhaps, maybe le Sanhedrin hu deka'ama lahu Rahmana de lishailu ba'urim v'tumim, question mark. Perhaps, says the Gemara, this mention over here of the Sanhedrin is that HaKadosh Baruch Hu, Rahmana, we've had that before, the Torah, Rahmana is the Torah, because Rahmana means the merciful one, and the Torah was written by the merciful one. So the Torah is often called Rahmana after its author. We do that a lot in Judaism, don't we? We call people, well, we do it the other way around, don't we? We call people after the books that they've written, as opposed to the book by the author. So we will call Rabbi Yisrael Meir Kagan Halevi HaKohen. What will we call him? Rabbi Yisrael Meir Kagan HaKohen. What will we call him? Johnny, you know what we call him? David, what will we call him?
Chofetz Chaim.
We will call him the Chofetz Chaim because he wrote a book called the Chofetz Chaim. You might also call him the Mishnah Brura, or you might also call him the Bior Halacha. We would also refer to Reb Yosef Karo by a name. What would we call him? Yes, Johnny. You're muted.
The Shulchan Aruch.
The Shulchan Aruch. Rabbi Yosef Karo wrote the Shulchan Aruch. He is known as the Shulchan Aruch. And there's loads of them. The Beit Yosef, that was Beit Yosef was brisk, I think, wasn't it? Is that right, David? The Beit Yosef is the brisker of. And
Ask David who the chosen was. The chosen one, David.
No, is it? You won't find him in the Gemara.
So anyway, Rahmana, it refers to the Torah or to Hashem himself. Maybe, says the Gemara, when we say the Sanhedrin, this is just that this is the source for the Torah giving permission for the Sanhedrin to go and ask a question of the Urim V'Tumim. So in other words, says the Gemara, maybe Rabbi Abahu, this is not what you're saying. This pasuk comes to teach us that the only people who can ask a question of the Urim V'Tumim are the king, the Mashiach L'Milchama, HaMashuach L'Milchama, the priestly, the war priest, and the Sanhedrin. They're the only people that can approach the Urim V'Tumim and ask a question. You can't just rock up to the Kohen Gadol and say, could you tell me where my cat is? It's lost. You can't do that. Only these, according to the Gemara, maybe that's what this pasuk is telling us. And it's nothing to do with who says we go out to war and we don't go out to war. Sharon, do you have your hand up, or is that an old hand?
No, I do. I have a question. Do you think that perhaps the Kohen Gadol, and we've sort of minimized his role, the one who's in charge of declaring war and doing this analysis, whether he was really a specialist on the ethics and morals and halacha of war, that he wasn't just performing a ritual duty, but that he also was the repository of knowledge of whether the nation ought to be risking itself and so forth. Is it possible that his role was more complex than sort of a magical one?
I absolutely agree. I think you're right. This guy is no ordinary guy, is he? Because he is anointed with the oil of the temple. The only people that are anointed with the oil of the temple, apart from King Charles, is the king of Israel and the Kohen Gadol and this Mashuach L'Milchama. So he must be a special guy. He's not just some guy that picked out of the ranks and said, right, you'll do. It's just a ceremonial position. I agree with Sharon. I think that's a very, very good suggestion, that this man must have been somebody whose opinion was greatly valued, because according to Rabbi Abahu, he is part of the decision-making process with the king and the Sanhedrin. So, he's up there in the war cabinet, and it's a very small war cabinet. If you consider the Sanhedrin as one unit, you've got the Sanhedrin, the king, and this chap. So he's not a nobody. And I'm sure that Sharon is right to point that out, that this will have been somebody, maybe somebody who is experienced in military strategy, less likely since he's a Kohen. Kohanim did not go out to battle themselves. They have a problem going out to battle. Their problem, of course, is death. Once you've killed a person as a Kohen, you're no longer allowed to serve as a Kohen in the Beit HaMikdash. You also are not allowed to get tamei, and in war there is lots of death around. So it may not necessarily have been his military strategy that they had him for. You probably got the king for that. He will have been there to have given the moral view. He will have been Lahavdil Elef Havdalos, the Archbishop of Canterbury chappie, who gives the moral compass to the nation. So I think that's absolutely right, and thank Sharon for pointing that out. It's an excellent observation, which I'm sure is right, that this would have been a man of incredibly high moral fiber, knowledge, ethical behavior, and beyond any kind of suspicion of ulterior motive. Yes, Johnny, you've got your hand.
Yeah, Steinsaltz says he was anointed especially to stand and instruct the people before war. So
yeah, the instructions are that ceremony that he says.
Yeah.
I suppose if you expand that, he's instructing them in the morals of war as well. I think that's what we would like to say, that this was more than just a ceremonial position, that he is the face of the ethics and morality of war. And of course, we don't have to look very far, do we, in our modern day to see how important the ethics of war is, human shields, putting rocket launchers in hospitals and in kindergartens, etc., etc.
They showed you last week, if you don't mind me just mentioning it, I saw on TV that the helicopters that were going in to kill this last terrorist, they saw him in a car with his wife and 3 kids. So they aborted the mission until he dropped the kids and wife off, and then they got him.
That's a moral army.
It's on the news, yeah, fantastic.
That is a moral army. That is something that listen, in war sometimes it's necessary to kill.
Yeah.
The way you kill, the way you prosecute war speaks volumes about a people. And it is said, how do I know? I have no idea. What's his name? Sir Richard, what's he called? That guy, Kemp, is he called?
Kemp.
He says, and he knows about a thing or two about war. He was a general in the British Army. And he says that the IDF is the most moral army in the entire world. I would like to believe him. And if I hope he's right, and if he's right, it's something that we should be very, very proud of. Going to war is not something that we should be doing. As my son said to me fairly recently, actually, when we were talking about his army service, he says, "Dad, I did things that I shouldn't have been asked to be done at that age. It had to be done, and we did it, but I'm not proud of it." So it's a question of how you do it. Sometimes you have to do things that are unpleasant. It's a question of how you do it. And this Mashuach LaMilchama, as Sharon points out, will have been the person to have given that moral fiber to the army. And I think that's really, really important. And I think that point that Sharon raised there is absolutely vital for us to spend time thinking about and to absorb. So, according to Rabbi Abahu, the war cabinet consists of the king, the war Kohen, and the Sanhedrin. The Gemarah says, but wait a minute, maybe this pasuk is just telling us who is allowed and who is not allowed to go in front of the Urim V'Tumim. So it kicks out Rabbi Abahu's suggestion. And now we come to a very peculiar suggestion, to be honest. I'm just going to read it. We've only got a couple of minutes. I'm just going to read the next bit of Gemara and leave it at that, ready for an assault on this piece of Gemara next week. So the Gemara now brings another gentleman who comes up with a rather bizarre suggestion. And it goes like this. Ella, rather, I think it's this. Ki hada amar Rab Acha bar Bizna. Amar Rabbi Shimon Chasida. This fellow, Rav Acha bar Bizna, said in the name of Shimon Chasida, Kinor haya talui lamala mimitato shel David. When David went to bed at night, he hung up his harp or his lyre. If you remember when we were learning Shmuel, we learned the difference between a lyre and a harp. I can't actually remember it now.
The picture of it on the bottom of the page.
Let's have a look.
Of a lyre.
Oh, there we are. There's an, well, I don't even know how to say that word. Aeolian harp. Anyway, there it is. Okay. Anyway, when he went to bed at night, he hung his harp above his bed. Kinor, a harp, hayatalui lamala mimitato shel David. It was hanging above his bed. It's like us when we go to bed at night, you know, we put our mobile phones next to the bed, we take our glasses off on the bedside table. He had his harp hanging on a hook over his head when he goes to bed at night. Now, what happened was, Kiven shehegia chatzot laila, at midnight, there was ruach tzefonit menashevet bo. At midnight, a northern wind came along and started to play the lyre. The wind swept across the harp and played this lyre. I suppose it's an early form of cock radio, where you go to bed listening to the music to get you to sleep. Maybe David couldn't sleep, and at midnight he woke up, and to get himself back to sleep, the wind, I don't know. Anyway, it's a bit bizarre.
Isn't it more like
The northern wind sweeps through the window and plays this harp of its own accord. V'hayam, and again, me'elav, and it played it on its own. The wind came through and swept through the lyre, and there was this lovely harp music. So what happened is it woke David up. Miyad, immediately, Haya David Omeid, David would stand up, v'osek batorah, and he would learn Torah. Okay, presumably he did all his ablutions and what have you first, and then he learned Torah ad sha'ala amud hashachar, until dawn, and then it was time to get up. So, in other words, he was only like any other guy. Something woke him up in the middle of the night, couldn't get back to sleep. So what does he do? He gets up and he learns Torah. You know, we might get up and read a novel or watch a film or try and get back to sleep counting sheep or whatever it is. He gets up and learns Torah until it's time to get out of bed or time to get up.
Isn't it different from what you're saying? Surely it wasn't to help him to go to sleep. It was to wake him up. It was an alarm clock, and he wanted to get up and he wanted to study Torah. I mean, he was a very busy man, having read Tehillim constantly lately. He had to find a lot of time to do all the things he did. So why couldn't it have been an alarm clock?
Sure. Yeah, could well be. Yeah.
That's how I see it. Had he not wanted to be awakened, he would not have hung it above his bed. He would have left it in an antechamber.
Okay, I don't disagree. Fine, I have no problem with that. It doesn't alter what we're going to say next. So it was a form of primitive alarm system. He would hang it up there. So at midnight, he would get woken up by the northern wind and he would learn his Torah. Very good. I like it. Anyway, what happened next is what is important to the Gemara. Kivan sha'ala amud hashachar, when it became dawn, then nichnasu chachmei Yisrael etzlo. The wise people of Israel would come to him. They'd come and see him. This was the daily briefing. I think the king has a weekly briefing with the Prime Minister in the UK. The Prime Minister goes to Buckingham Palace and confers with the monarch once a week. Well, this seems to have been a daily thing in the time of David. His advisors, his wise people would come, and as Rav Steinsaltz says, they would discuss various concerns of the nation and the economy. And we're going to stop there because time is up. If you don't want to have a spoiler, don't read on. But it's an exciting little story of what they discussed, how the matters of state were conducted at the time of David HaMelech, and we will learn that next week. So what have we done today? We had a little bit of a political discussion about the Haredi draft or lack thereof, and the famous pasuk in Parashot Matot, Ha'acheichem yavo lamilchama va'atem yoshvim po. We spoke about that. We then went into our Gemarah and tried to find a source for the 71 Sanhedrin being required to go out to a milchama, and Rabbi Abahu had an attempt which we didn't think was a good idea. Rabbeinu Yonah didn't think it was a good idea right from the start because it wasn't even talking about the right kind of war. The Gemarah says that was all about who could go to the Urim V'Tumim, and now we have just described David HaMelech's primitive or sophisticated, if you like, alarm clock system to wake him up in the middle of the night so that he can learn his Torah and not waste his precious time sleeping. Next week, we will, please God, look at the affairs of state of King David and how wars were declared and prosecuted at the time of King David, which, as we said, are indeed milchamot reshut. They are discretionary wars. The wars of King David to expand the boundaries, as we'll see next week, are exactly the kind of war we're talking about in our Mishnah. CF, as Rabbeinu Yonah points out, the war of Joshua, which was not that type of war. So all in all, this second attempt by the Gemarah is probably going to be more successful than Rabbi Abahu's. But watch this space and we will see next week. Any questions before we call it a day for today? Okay, in that case, I will just stop the recording.